Let's talk about Idaho. This is, of course, on everybody's minds. And there have been reports that genetic genealogy was used in nabbing this suspected killer, Bryan Kohberger, 28 years old, 10 miles away from the murder site, pursuing his PhD in criminology at the University of Washington, the 4 victims from the University of Idaho. They have only told us so far that DNA was detected on one button of the knife sheath that they tell us in the supporting affidavit for the warrant for arrest was found next to one of the victims. One button on a knife sheath. So that's kind of interesting. It's kind of surprising, I would think. I would think there'd be more DNA at this site. So what does it tell you that they're zeroing in, first of all, on just that one little button as opposed to on the body of the 4 victims, on the bedpost, on the door handles, right? What does it tell you?
Well, I think that he went to great lengths to not leave DNA. He likely had gloves on. He was, educated about this. You would think he certainly would have made sure he wasn't leaving DNA behind, but he must have handled that knife sheath earlier when he didn't have gloves on. That's my guess. But I also want to point out that they don't have to reveal everything they have in the affidavit, and you know that, of course. And so I think it's very possible they have additional DNA. And even if they didn't, they might by now, because I'm sure they've been going through all of that physical evidence batch by batch, sending that to the Idaho Crime Lab and trying to detect any additional DNA. So I don't think we'll really know what they have until this case progresses. And hopefully they will find more DNA or already have. Mm-hmm. It might be more complex, meaning there might be mixtures of blood. Cases I've worked where there was a frenzied stabbing, almost always the knife has slipped and cut the suspect as well. But then you have a mixture, and you might even have a mixture of 3 people in this case. Maybe you have his blood plus 2 of the victims' blood, for instance, and they have to do what's called deconvolution, where they extract out the victim's DNA and are left with just that suspect's DNA. And so it's possible that could have taken more time, which is possibly why they were focusing on this knife sheath for the affidavit. I imagine
yes,
that
because
was
there
touch DNA.
They say that was what was found on that button was single source male DNA. So what does that mean?
Means there was just one DNA contributor. So that's a much more straightforward DNA sample than if they have a mixture otherwise, which could be why they focused on that for the affidavit, because it's the most straightforward. Now, that was likely touch DNA, unless he happened to leave a little bit of blood on that, but I would guess it's touch DNA. And that is just a few skin cells, most likely. So that's not very much DNA. And that really illustrates how far technology has come.
Yeah. So what, my feeling as a lawyer in discussing this case is if I'm the defense and best case scenario for Bryan Kohberger, that's all the DNA they have of his at the scene. I'm thinking I'm good because maybe Bryan Kohberger went to the store wherever they sold that knife in the sheath and he touched it, he picked it up and it was still left on there. So how long does one's touch DNA last? That'll be relevant.
It will be, and I agree with you. Touch DNA is not the optimal DNA sample that you would want to have in this case. Let's hope maybe it was a drop of blood instead, and I'm wrong about my supposition that it was touch DNA. But I think that the prosecution can argue that if he had handled it, then somebody else would have had to have handled it, and their DNA should also be on there. And you would see a mixture, or you would see their DNA as the primary DNA. Now, they can certainly argue that maybe the next person to handle it wore gloves and they were trying to set him up. So they transported it to the crime scene and left it there. So I do think there is some room for argument there. And it's very fortunate that they have other evidence. And that's really important because DNA, as you well know, should not be the only evidence in a case. You certainly hope they will be able to support it with other types of evidence.
We're going to get into this on our legal panel tomorrow, but this is why all the surveillance tape of the car and so on is relevant. But I will say, it's not open and shut. It's definitely not open and shut. There's all sorts of things around that crime scene. There's a Walmart, there's a 24/7 grocery store. If I'm his lawyer, I'm going to say that's why he was over there. That's why you see him going by there. He's an insomniac. His own neighbor testified to that. Not testified, but said it to reporters. In any event, we'll get into that tomorrow. But wouldn't there be, if there was touch DNA on the button, CeCe, wouldn't there be typically touch DNA on the rest of the knife sheath?
Well, not if he wiped it down, or I think the knife sheath was leather. It's maybe less likely to retain that touch DNA than the button. It's touch DNA, it's transferable. It's easy to wipe away. You can shake someone's hand and you get their touch DNA on your hand, and you can then transfer it to a different item. And so it is more, transitory or transferable, and it's harder to detect. So I'm not sure they would find it on the leather. And also he might have wiped that down. I mean, I'm surprised he didn't wipe the whole thing down. So
yeah, he might have forgotten about the button. So if they found, and we don't know what the order of events was. We don't know if they found the white Hyundai Elantra and linked it to Bryan Kohberger, or if they got onto him from this touch DNA. But if it was the latter, they have a couple of, let's say it's touch DNA, a couple skin cells that the lab tech sees miraculously, and good for him or her. And they run them into their law enforcement database first, I would assume. Let's say there's no hits. As far as we know, there was some sort of, well, I don't know. Like Bryan Kohberger doesn't have a criminal record as far as we know. I don't know that his father or anybody else does. So then what? Where do they go from there?
Well, there had to be enough DNA extracted by the Idaho crime lab that they were able to split that and send some of it to the private lab that would have created the genetic genealogy profile. And so there must have been, enough, but even that could be a tiny amount. So they would have created their profile, their law enforcement court admissible profile at the crime lab, and then sent out what was remaining to a private lab. They would reanalyze it from scratch and create that genetic genealogy profile, which I believe was likely sent back to the FBI investigative genetic genealogy team. So I think it's very likely they did the genetic genealogy in-house. We saw how closely involved the FBI was in this case. And they've been training agents all over the country since you and I met to do this work. So for almost 5 years, the FBI has been training their agents to do it. I suspect strongly they kept this in-house, but they would have had to use a private lab to create that profile.
Okay, listen, is your business still using spreadsheets and emails to manage important sales commission? Don't do that. Is your support and operations staff stretched too thin? They might quit. That's what's happening. Are your salespeople constantly trying to piece together the puzzle for what they're getting paid for and what's potentially missing? That's annoying. Why are you doing it like that? ClearComp has got you. They've got the solution to all of this. ClearComp is a one-stop shop for your business to manage sales commission documentation like commission plan info, product info, and facts. It's basically a sales operations and sales enablement dream platform. ClearComp works seamlessly and securely with your existing software applications for your billing, CRM, HR, you get the picture. Your sales team will perform their best with real-time results and earnings using ClearComp's interactive dashboards. And your operations team will be able to make commission plan adjustments with just a few clicks. So please, get it done. Get her done already, would you? Modernize your sales org. Improve your business today by visiting clearcomp.com. That's ClearComp.com. Book a demo and tell them I sent you. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.